Welcome to Real Estate IQ Wisdom for Smart Moves. We will explore the insider secrets tailored exclusively for Silicon Valley home buyers, sellers, and investors, arming you to conquer the unique real estate landscape. So, without further ado, let's dive into this exciting conversation. In today's episode, we welcome Kathy Ganch and Melissa Palafox-Ofiana from Chicago Title. They specialize in offering expert title services and coordinating with multiple stakeholders, all while ensuring smooth and seamless real estate transactions. America's title insurance awareness gap. Only 48% of Americans are aware of title insurance, often unaware of its role in protecting property rights. 43% of low-income homeowners are aware of title insurance, compared to 61% of high-income homeowners. Nearly 25% of home transactions face title issues, from unpaid liens to recording errors. Disclosure: the following content is only for informational purposes. Please consult a licensed consultant for your specific situation, or if you need any specific legal or tax advice.
Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Kathy, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Could you please share your professional background, Melissa?
Of course, Sharad. I've started my escrow career back in 2000. I worked for a real estate office in the same Cupertino area that I'm currently in, and I started as a escrow coordinator, and then from there moved on to the title and escrow field and worked my way up. So I've been at Chicago Title for the last 22 years.
Wow.
And I'm currently the manager of the Cupertino office.
And how about you, Kathy?
So I too started on the real estate side. I started as a receptionist in the real estate industry, and then I've been in Chicago with Chicago Title for 32 years. I transitioned over, and it's been an incredible journey. I've seen so many different markets and just grown along the way. It's been fantastic.
How's your 32 years been?
32 years it's been great. Actually, it's been great. I'm still here, so that's
awesome.
Good. Thank you.
So what is a title company?
So we are actually a title and escrow company. So we handle issuing title insurance, and title insurance protects the buyer and the seller to ensure the property is free and clear when it transfers, and to make sure if there's any old things that pop up from the previous seller, any new things going down the line for as long as the buyer owns the property, we provide title insurance to cover for any unknown thing that may pop up. As far as the escrow side, so we do have escrow branches. Melissa is our escrow officer in one of our branches, and she facilitates the escrow. She handles the paperwork. She's the neutral third person between the buyer and the seller. We do all kinds of things behind the scene. We work with our title department who does the title search. We make sure that there's no unknown issues or issues that have to be addressed on the transaction. And then Melissa works behind the scene diligently to make sure if there's any old deeds of trust that pop up, anything that needs to be cleared off to make sure we ensure clear title, we get that all taken care of through the transaction. We also facilitate the client signing the documents. We take the funds into as the transaction. We take in the lender funds. We disperse everything at close of escrow, and to complete the transaction for the buyer and the seller.
Briefly describe the escrow process.
So the escrow process is the paperwork. Once you go into a contract with a seller and a buyer, we get a copy of the signed ratified agreement. And then we take the terms from there and we prepare the paperwork for the sellers and the buyers to sign. If the buyers have a lender involved, we coordinate the signing of the lender's paperwork as well. And we break it down so that the seller sees their terms on a simplified version, which is our escrow instructions, and correlated with the title search, which is the preliminary title report. We address any liens and encumbrances that are on there and make sure that when the buyer takes title, that it's free and clear of any existing liens that is currently under the seller's name. And that would be involved with a payoff. If there's any other title issues, we address that before we get to the signing table. For a buyer, we take in their earnest money deposit and prepare, again, all the paperwork for them to sign to take title at the end of the transaction. Involved in that is issuing the title insurance policy. With the lender's documents, we facilitate the signing with the buyers, and we make sure that they understand and all their paperwork when they're taking title. If that's involved with a loan transaction, we help them understand the note and the deed of trust and what is involved with the transaction at closing.
Why is title insurance important for homeowners?
That's a great question, Sherrod. I can't even stress enough how important title insurance is to have. There are so many things that can pop up and people think, oh, my title's clear, I'm fine. But things can pop up down the road from prior sellers. Errors can pop up when property's been sold and maybe they didn't agree to the property being sold, or they didn't know it was sold, and they could come up and say, hey, I'm entitled to that property. We cover for that. In 2008, 2009, we saw a lot of mechanics liens coming through. And that was one thing. Title insurance covers mechanic liens. And what a mechanic lien is if somebody's done work to your property and maybe the prior owner didn't pay that contractor, they have so much time that they can come in and file a mechanics lien to put a claim on your property to get paid. And so we take care of that. Forged documents, fraud, forgery, there's so many things that can pop up. Easements. A lot of times you don't realize an easement is, boundary lines and different things that you can do when you purchase a property. Those are all disclosed. But sometimes things pop up, and sometimes you don't know there's a problem with an easement until that neighbor next door moves and a new neighbor moves in and they want to do something specific to the property, right, and there's an easement there preventing that. And people don't realize that. So those are all things that can come down. We pay a lot of claims every year. We have $1.8 billion in reserves, but we make sure we have that because title claims do pop up all the time. And less hassle for you as a buyer or you as a seller, because we're going to come back and we're going to take care of those things for both sides. So it's a great thing to have. And title insurance is something, it's not like homeowners fire insurance. You pay a premium every year. Title insurance is a fantastic value because you pay for it when you purchase the property. Santa Clara County, it's customary for the seller to pay. In other counties, sometimes the buyer pays, but it's a one-time fee that you pay, and it stays with the property for the life of that you own the property. So if you own that property for 5 years, you're covered. If you own that property for 20 years, you're covered. If you own it for 40 years, that title insurance policy stays in place and protects you the entire time, and you don't pay a yearly premium every year. It is a great value, and it's something really important to have.
Would you like to add something, Melissa?
We get a lot of buyers that come to the table thinking it's optional. We don't suggest it being optional. And that's what title insurance protects, is what happened up until the time you purchase the property. We protect against anybody that might be coming back to the table, like Kathy said, any liens up until that point on work that was done prior to you taking ownership. So huge asset for a buyer to have. Huge.
How does title search protect home buyers?
So a title search is pulling public record on a specific property through the chain of title, and it makes sure that we have the rightful owner showing of record that appears on our preliminary title report. It also pulls up any public documents that have been recorded against the property, easements, matters, liens, encumbrances, anything that's showing, we show that on the preliminary title report. So title insurance or a title search is beneficial to a buyer to see exactly what they're purchasing at the time of the sale. So say a owner is of record and perhaps someone's passed away. It'll show possibly heirs or successors of title. You want to know exactly who you're dealing with when you're purchasing a property.
So also one other thing, that the benefit of the title search is that it does pull up, like Melissa said, the easements. And those are really important, especially, we run a preliminary title report when escrow gets opened and when the house goes on the market. And those are really important because maybe somebody's purchasing a property and they want to do something specific with it. So we've had issues where people have purchased properties and it's a lovely yard and they want to put a pool in the middle of the yard. And the nice thing about what we can do is we prepare a color-coded easement map, and it will show where all the easements run. And sometimes there's a PG&E easement,
Right.
utility easement that runs right where they wanted that beautiful pool, and they can't put it in that area. So it's a great disclosure. We have that information up front. But we have seen or heard, some claims that have been filed that people had purchased a property and didn't have that search. And when they purchased the property, they specifically wanted to do something with it and found out from the city once they purchased it that they could not do that. So those are things to really be aware of and to be able to rely on your title report to have that disclosure information up front. So it's a really important search.
On a final note, title search is important for a buyer because it gives them the peace of mind of knowing what they're going to be purchasing. It's one of the biggest purchases of their entire life, purchasing a home, and you know exactly what you're going to be getting when you're purchasing the home with a title search.
What risks does title insurance cover?
So title insurance covers so many risks. I mean, too many risks to list. But to name a few, fraud, cover forgery. Heirs are people who think they have a claim to a property that really don't. Building permit violations, that's a big one. Mechanics liens that can pop up that we discussed earlier. Easements. Sometimes there's disputes against easements, and title insurance covers that. And that is the nice thing about that, because you can just have your buyer or refer to the claims department, and they will go to bat for them against if there's a dispute with a neighbor or something like that. They handle all of that stuff. There's so many things that title insurance covers. Unrecorded deeds. Deeds executed by a minor. Be surprised, but that does happen, and those are title insurance covers against that. So it also covers forced removal of a structure. So if there is a structure that's built over an easement and it becomes a violation, then they do cover the cost of removing that structure. So that's an important thing to have as well.
Interesting. Are there any exceptions to title insurance?
There are some exceptions to the rule, depending on the type of policy that's issued at closing. There's the Alta Extended Homeowners Policy. There's a CLTA Standard Homeowner Policy. So it just depends on which coverage was issued at closing and the covered risks at that time. And it is covered up into the purchase price. So the title insurance policy is based on the sales price.
What happens if title issues arise after the purchase?
So after the purchase, the buyer would contact the insuring office, and we would put them in contact with our claims department. They're going to file a written request stating what the risk factor was and what their claim is that they would like covered. The claims department would take over from there and do a thorough investigation into that claim and see what type of coverage would be issued and proceed with filing the title insurance claim from their standpoint. Things that are not covered under that would be items that are disclosed on the prelim at escrow process before we close. So on the prelim, it's going to list property taxes that are currently open, easements, matters, CC&Rs. Those are all items that they take subject to at the time of closing. So those won't be items that they can come back and say, oh, I didn't know about this, when we have them sign, read and approve a copy of our preliminary title report prior to closing.
So what policy should a home buyer purchase?
According to the contract, it does stipulate the Alta homeowner policy. There is also a few exceptions when we have to issue a CLTA standard policy. It doesn't have the same coverages, but not every buyer, such as investors, or someone purchasing vacant land fall under the ALT homeowner policy.
Can a buyer or seller close escrow if they are out of the country?
Yes, they can. That's a great question. We come across this all the time. We just need to make sure that the clients are aware that there has to be adequate time to schedule an appointment with the U.S. Embassy or consulate, or have the document notarized in their country and then passed through the government for approval prior to us receiving the original. Again, we need to receive the original prior to closing in order to close the transaction. Some scenarios, we prepare a power of attorney for sellers that know that they're going to be out of the country during when they go into a contract, and that will allow for use of their power of attorney to sign the documents to close the transaction. Some buyers come in with a 7-day closing, 14-day closing, and that's not adequate time for a seller or a buyer to sign at a U.S. government office and have their documents notarized and us receive them. Overnight delivery is sometimes 2 to 3 days. I've had transactions where the documents don't receive back to my office until 2 weeks later after they were executed because it gets held up in customs.
Sure.
So yes, it can. It's possible. Again, just need to make sure that there's adequate time for time restraints.
Worried about the dilemma of selling first or buying first? TradeMyHome.com, powered by Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty, has the solution. With our guaranteed 24-hour cash offers, you won't risk owning 2 homes or being homeless. You can buy first and sell later. Are you upgrading or downgrading in the next 3 to 6 months? Text PAIR to 408-740-7400 for a free and no-obligation professional equity appraisal report. For more information, visit TradeMyHome.com or call 408-740-7400. Remember, at TradeMyHome.com, your home is sold guaranteed or we'll buy it.
Share a story where you resolved multiple title issues in a transaction.
Good question. There's several transactions that come to mind. Probate is one topic that you have to get the paperwork from the probate attorney and make sure we have the documents in place prior to closing. Sometimes it hasn't gotten court approval yet, so then we have to wait for that clearance. With that being said, the seller that was of record had a loan, and it was an older loan, and the administrator or executor of the estate didn't know any information about that old loan. So we had to go around and get a bond, a lost note bond around that old loan because there wasn't enough information to backtrack to track down the old release of record. Another scenario, judgments. We had a judgment pop up on a transaction, and we have to go back and request a demand. We have to make sure judgments are taken care of prior to closing. That's one of the things that title search will pick up. And the owner of record was a company name versus an individual, and the judgment for the company name also was pulling his personal name. So it was attached to multiple properties, not just ours, but the face value was something that had to be definitely taken care of prior to closing. When we do our title search, the title department picks up CC&Rs. CC&Rs are recorded against the property to show the name of the association, and liens and dues are a requirement. And we've had situations where they weren't recorded against the property, and there was two HOAs versus one. And we've had to go back and make sure that the seller provides all the information for both associations.
Sure.
So we had one regarding CC&Rs where a buyer was purchasing a property, and the buyer as he should, but many people don't. He actually read through the whole CC&Rs, and it looked like in the property that he was purchasing, this was in a condo complex, and it looked like the unit number that he was purchasing should have been a below market rate unit, a BMR unit.
I see.
And so they're like, wait a minute. So the buyer decides, hey, I should be getting this property as a BMR unit, not a regular price unit. And so the seller filed a claim because they purchased it as a regular property. In doing research with the title department, they found that there was an error in the CC&Rs and the wrong unit number was listed as a BMR. So this property was not a BMR unit. And so they filed the claim. Our Chicago Title worked with the city of Los Gatos. It was in Los Gatos, and they had to rewrite and correct the CC&Rs and get that covered. And, there's attorneys involved, and that was something that was covered, and the buyer didn't have to come out of pocket for anything because we took care of that to ensure they were purchasing a full value property. So that was one of the things that kind of popped up on CC&Rs. There's lots of things that pop up. Old liens, we've seen so many where the seller has said, oh, I've paid that off, and it's been 30 years, but we don't have a reconveyance. It's still showing on the property. So again, like Melissa mentioned, there's several times where we have to have a bond issued until we can get that cleared off the property. So you'd be surprised behind the scenes, the work that the escrow officer does to get all this stuff handled. And a lot of times the clients don't even know, but they're taking care of any clouds that could pop up because we need to ensure that everything is clear. So sometimes it takes quite a while to get demands, and they're constantly following up with lenders, trying to get old deeds of deeds of trust removed, and it's quite a process.
Are there any other paperwork a buyer should look at when they're buying an HOA property?
Definitely the HOA documents,
Sure.
The CC&Rs. It's everybody's supposed to get and read their CC&Rs. They're about this thick,
Right.
so people don't tend to read them. But things pop up. A lot of times, the things that are in the CC&Rs are no longer valid these days. But there are things that are relevant. So the HOA docs are, if they're purchasing a property with an HOA, those are very important.
On the topic of HOA, they should read the HOA demand. The HOA demand is going to tell them exactly what their monthly dues are. If they have a copy of minutes from the HOA, take a look at the last couple meeting minutes and see if there's been any address about special assessments, future special assessments. Sometimes a buyer comes on board when they're just initially discussing possibly a new roof for the whole condominium. And so that's going to impact a buyer, especially if they have to afford $200 every month for the special assessment on top of their mortgage, on top of their HOA dues. Those are great things to know. Another item would be when they're purchasing the property, the buyer's not always responsible for the ordering of the HOA docs and the transfer fee. Sometimes it's the buyer responsible for paying those. And sometimes when the buyer goes to sell that property, they're not realizing that those were costs involved. So sometimes if they read through the HOA demand, it'll stipulate how much the transfer fee was, how much the docs were. So in the event when they go to sell the property in years' time, that they're aware that those are going to be additional costs that they're going to have to incur.
Are there any other things which a seller should take care of when they're selling a HOA property?
Just make sure that they're current on their dues. If they're not, we have to bring them current. Some associations have estoppel inspections, which means the HOA has to go in and inspect the property. Sometimes the front doors or walls or cabinets have to be a specific paint that's approved by the HOA. Flooring is another keynote. Some upper units can't have hardwood floor, so they have to have carpeting. And if any homeowner has replaced their flooring that wasn't approved by the association, they will ask the homeowner to change that back or update it to bring it to the standard of the association's guidelines.
What should a seller know about lien releases and clearing title issues?
So they should have all their documentation, any open loans that are of record, and make sure that they provide their escrow officer the loan number, bank name, contact phone number. We will also ask for cross-reference, such as a social security number. When the preliminary title report is issued, make sure that we're showing that same one or two loans of record. Sometimes we come into the transaction and we have a quick closing. Sometimes that preliminary title report is a key factor that shows 2 or 3 open liens or deeds of trust, and we have to try and track down old loan information. Sometimes a seller has just refinanced their property within the last year or two, and that reconveyance hasn't recorded or the release hasn't recorded from the previous lender. If the seller has any old documentation, such as a letter that says this loan's been paid in full, some lenders have been known to send the original reconveyance to the homeowner to have the original document recorded. So then sometimes their old documentation, they'll be opening letters and see that there's an original document in there. I've come into an occurrence where a 1986 old reconveyance, they happen to have in their old paperwork that I was able to record with my closing transaction. Had they not had that, that bank had already been closed.
Right.
That bank was no longer in existence. We would have had to have gone the lost bond route. But yeah, anytime that they have any loan paperwork, retain that information for as long as you can. I know that everybody says 7 years, keep your information. But another point, credit lines. Sometimes you have a credit line and you think that just because you have a zero balance on it, that it can stay open. No, that's one of the key factors that we have to close. Because if it's still open, it's still attached to the property. If it's still attached to the property and we don't close it, the seller can draw on that, and the buyer now has a credit line against the previous owner, still showing on the property. So yes, we still have to get documentation. Even if a loan has a zero balance, we have to make sure that we get paid in full and request the reconveyance from that lender of record.
What other issues should a buyer look at when they are buying a short sale property or a foreclosure property?
Well, they want to make sure that who they're dealing with, make sure that the sale's been approved by that lender, make sure that they're reviewing any documentation that's been provided to know that they will have that property at closing. Title and escrow, we make sure that we pull the current owner of record. If it shows the bank name, if it's in a foreclosure, we need to make sure that that everything's been stipulated in the agreement of the sale, that the banks agreed to the terms of the sale, and that we pay off and close in accordance with that contract from the lender. Because the lender has to agree to the terms of the short sale.
Can you cite a recent example of a buyer fraud?
Yes, in fact, as Kathy was talking about our Start in Here platform, we had a buyer, went through the whole platform, answered all our questionnaires, initiated his deposit with our wire instructions that were in there, and initiated the deposit. A couple weeks later, we go to close the transaction. He's getting ready to wire in his funds, and he received an email with wire instructions that said, your funds due to close are needed. Here's our wire instructions. Please send in your deposit. However, he initially had signed our wire fraud notice that says our wire instructions will not change. This will be reiterated, towards throughout the transaction. You will use the same instructions to use for your closing funds. Well, he fell susceptible to the wire fraud, and he followed those wire instructions that the fraudster had sent him and wired out his funds to close. He then reached out to the escrow officer and said, have you received my funds to close? And she's like, no, we haven't received any funds. When did you send them? He's like, well, I was talking with you earlier and I told you that I sent them earlier. Well, the fraudster posed as the escrow office, changed the signature block, or used her, captured her signature block, changed the email address, and the buyer fell susceptible to the fraud.
Oh my
Those
God.
are clear examples, yeah. Our wire instructions will not change. It states that on our wire fraud notice. We reiterate it to the buyer, saying use the same wire instructions that you used at the onset of the transaction, or bring in a cashier's check. We always accept cashier's checks for funds to close, as long as it's the day before closing.
And so one of the biggest things, because on a lot of the wire fraud, it is emails getting hacked, different things. And, they're creating emails that look like our emails, but are a little bit different. So when you're receiving these emails, if you look at the email address, you really want to match it and make sure. And a lot of time people are in a hurry. They want to get, that's really important when we're talking about, people's life savings and people are purchasing a home, especially funds to close, that gets verified. And we talk to our agents like you, and you let your clients know wire instructions are not going to change. So if it does change, pick up the phone and question it, because we just want to make sure that your funds are safe.
Another suggestion, we tell all the buyers to call and verify the wire instructions before sending any funds. Call a trusted number. Ask your realtor, what is the escrow office phone number? Who's the escrow officer involved? Do they have a direct line? Don't think that just because you received a phone call saying, or an email, or saying that the wire instructions have changed, that's true. Call, verify. Our wire instructions, we tell everybody, do not change. They have been in place for several years. They have not changed. We disclose them only to the buyers. We do not include the realtors to avoid potential fraud and someone obtaining their email and changing the wire instructions, and the buyer falls subject to fraud. And again, it's always good to keep in mind, tell your clients, always verify wire instructions before sending any funds.
So what should a buyer do if they become a victim of wire fraud?
Notify their bank, notify their escrow office, stop all communications with the fraudster if they know who the fraudster, where they came in at. Normally it's via email, sometimes it's by phone, but stop all communication and notify your bank as soon as you can. Notify the escrow office that they fall subject to, and perhaps if it was one of our emails that was changed, we'd like to know so we can try and prevent any future phishing attempts.
What are the chances of recovering the money after a wire fraud?
Depending on the time frame, from when you notify or when you notice that you've been called to this fraud attempt, notify your bank. Sometimes, depending on the window of opportunity, if the funds have already left your account or left the receiving bank account, slim. But there are chances that if you do it soon enough and quick enough that they can freeze that account and recall the wire. There's some chances where they get it back. Not all scenarios fall under that, though.
Why choose Chicago Title over your competitors?
So that is one of my favorite questions. Chicago Title is a nationwide company. We are part of the FNF umbrella. We are a Fortune 500 company, so we have strong financial security. We're number 539 on the Fortune 500 list. We're very proud of that. I think it comes down to our people as well. We have superior escrow officers, very experienced. We do extensive training, continual. We kind of change with the market and make sure that we're always up to date on everything. The one thing that we've rolled out for our client security, so buyers and sellers security, is our in here platform. And this is because we've seen so much fraud in the financial industry, so many different things, wire fraud. We rolled out a secure platform, and it is a portal like most of the big banks use now that you can securely log in for each of your transactions. Your information, you can access your transaction, you get updates, escrow officers update everything, and you're notified of different milestones happening through the transaction. And it's a secure portal to make sure that there's no issue or instance of wire fraud. Our wire instructions are not going to change. And so all of that is listed in there. So it's we take that very importantly, and we take our client security very importantly, and we will do everything we can. And I think being part of, a nationwide company, but we do have a small town feel, right? We provide customer service, and our customers are very important to us, and we will always go above and beyond to make sure the transactions are taken care of. We're not going to come back with a no. We're going to try to find solutions to make sure that we can close the transaction so everybody's happy. Homeownership is the goal, and that's what we want to ensure and close for our clients.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much, Kathy, for taking time to be here on our show today.
It's our pleasure.
Let's stay in touch.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
It's time for our trivia question to win prizes. This section is hosted by our AI host, Kay.
Hi, this is Kay from TradeMyHome.com, powered by Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. Your home sold guaranteed, or we'll buy it. Here is our real estate trivia question. What unique feature did Elvis Presley's home, Graceland, have? And your options are: jungle room, underwater garage, or roller coaster. Winners will get a $25 Amazon gift card and recognition in our next episode. Submit your entry on our website trademyhome.com/REIQ or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Only the top 3 correct answers will win.
Thank you for listening to the podcast and acknowledging the wisdom of smart moves in real estate in Silicon Valley. Please share this episode with a friend, subscribe, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts at Real Estate IQ. Thank you to our sponsor, TradeMyHome.com, for their client commitment and for making this podcast possible. If you're considering buying or selling a home, visit TradeMyHome.com. Until next time, remember to stay ahead in the real estate game.